The stars hung silent in the darkness around Threshold Prime like distant witnesses to a slow death, unfolding below them on the colony world's surface. Admiral Scareth of the Cathari Empire sat in his command throne aboard the flagship Crimson Talon and watched the tactical displays with satisfaction burning in his chest like well-earned pride. 6 cycles had passed since his third fleet had established the blockade around the rebellious human colony, and every day brought the inevitable surrender closer to reality. The Cathari were a patient species when patience served their purposes, and Scareth had all the time in the universe to wait for the colonists to realize their situation held no hope of rescue or escape. 47 warships formed an iron ring around Threshold Prime, and no supply vessel could penetrate that barrier without being turned into scattered atoms drifting through the void. The humans below had fought well enough in the beginning with their planetary defense batteries and their desperation-fueled courage, but courage meant nothing against superior numbers and advanced military doctrine. The Cathari Empire had dominated this sector of space for 3 centuries, and a single human colony would not break that dominance, no matter how stubbornly they clung to their futile resistance. Scareth's scales rippled with pleasure as he reviewed the latest intelligence reports from the surface. Food supplies were running critically low, according to their intercepted communications, and the colony's leadership was beginning to fracture under the pressure of impossible choices. Within another cycle or 2 at most, they would broadcast their unconditional surrender and beg for mercy that Scareth would grant only on the Empire's terms. His tactical officer approached the command throne with the careful deference that Scareth's rank demanded and reputation enforced. "Admiral," the officer said while keeping his eyes lowered in proper respect, "the outer sensor network has detected an anomaly at the edge of the system." Scareth barely glanced up from his displays, because anomalies were common in space and rarely signified anything worth an admiral's direct attention. "Explain," he commanded. "A gravitational distortion consistent with a vessel dropping out of faster than light travel," the tactical officer reported. "The signature suggests something large, but the readings are unclear due to the distance involved. Probably debris from a collapsed jump drive." Scareth dismissed the report with a wave of his clawed hand. "Or a merchant vessel that miscalculated its exit coordinates and arrived in the wrong system entirely." The tactical officer hesitated, and that hesitation made Scareth's attention sharpened, because trained Cathari officers did not hesitate without good reason. "What else?" Scareth demanded. "The object is moving," the officer said carefully, "accelerating toward the inner system at speeds that exceed our projected capabilities for a vessel of that mass." Now Scareth felt the first stirring of interest beneath his scaled hide, because speed meant military vessels and military vessels approaching. A Cathari blockade meant either reinforcements or foolish enemies. "Identify the vessel," he ordered, "and determine its origin and intent." The communications officer worked her console with practiced efficiency, and then went very still in a way that made every officer on the command deck turn to look at her. "Admiral," she said in a voice that trembled just slightly, "we are receiving a broadcast from the approaching vessel on multiple frequency bands, including our own military channels." "Play it," Scareth commanded. The voice that emerged from the speakers spoke in perfectly accented Cathari, with no trace of mechanical translation. Artifacts, and that alone was unusual because few species bothered to learn the Empire's language fluently enough to speak it without computer assistance. "This is the TCN's Indomitable," the voice announced with calm authority. "Terran Confederation Navy vessel operating under emergency humanitarian protocols." Scareth felt his muscles tense, because Terran meant human, and humans had no military presence in this sector that the Empire's intelligence networks had detected or anticipated. The broadcast continued with methodical precision that suggested military discipline rather than desperate bluffing. "You are ordered to withdraw all vessels from Threshold Prime within 1 standard hour, the human voice stated. This constitutes your only warning and your only opportunity to comply peacefully with our demands. Scareth's command deck erupted in reactions, ranging from confusion to outrage to nervous laughter, because the sheer audacity of the demand defied rational military thinking. One ship, his weapons officer sputtered, demands that 47 warships of the Imperial fleet retreat. Silence. Scareth commanded, and the deck went quiet immediately. He studied his tactical displays with growing curiosity, because the approaching vessel was indeed massive, according to the refining sensor. Data but mass alone did not win battles when facing overwhelming numerical superiority. Response options, he demanded from his staff. We could ignore the warning entirely, his tactical officer suggested, and continue with the blockade as planned. We could destroy the vessel as a demonstration, the weapons officer added eagerly, and show these humans what happens when they interfere in Imperial operations. Scareth considered both options while watching the countdown timer that had appeared on the communications display, showing the remaining time until the human deadline expired. 58 minutes. Calculate weapons range and intercept vectors, he ordered, but do not engage until I give the command directly. The hour crawled past with agonizing slowness as the human vessel continued its approach without deviation or hesitation. Every officer on the command deck watched their displays with mounting tension, because despite their numerical advantage, something about the situation felt wrong in ways that defied easy explanation. The communications officer reported periodic updates as the Indomitable broadcast. Countdown warnings every 10 minutes in Kathiri and in the human colonists' language, and in half a dozen other tongues that suggested the ship expected a wider audience than just Scareth's fleet. 30 minutes remaining, she announced. 20 minutes remaining. 10 minutes remaining. Scareth watched the approaching vessel grow larger on his tactical display and noted details that troubled his professional assessment of the situation. The human ship showed no signs of weapons charging or defensive shields activating, and no support vessels emerged from the darkness to reinforce it. Either the humans were monumentally foolish, or they possessed confidence born from capabilities that the Cathari had not yet observed. 5 minutes remaining, the communications officer said quietly. Scareth made his decision with the certainty of 3 decades commanding Imperial warships in combat against dozens of different species. Ignore the warning, he declared, and maintain blockade positions with all vessels. Admiral, his tactical officer ventured carefully. Perhaps we should at least. No. Scareth cut him off sharply. We do not negotiate with single vessels making impossible demands, and we do not retreat from inferior forces, no matter how bold their posturing might be. The countdown reached 0. The Indomitable continued its approach without slowing. And then the human ship broadcast one final message in that same calm professional voice that somehow made the words more chilling than any amount of rage or threat could have managed. Your hour has expired, the voice stated simply. What happens next is entirely your responsibility and your choice. Scareth leaned back in his command throne and watched the human vessel close the distance with steady, unstoppable momentum like a force of nature, rather than a mere warship. Let them come, he said to his assembled officers, and let them learn what it means to challenge the Cathari Empire with inadequate force. The bridge crew returned to their stations with renewed confidence because their admirals. Certainty was infectious, and because 47 ships against 1 represented the kind of mathematical advantage that transcended tactics or technology. On the tactical display, the Indomitable continued its approach, and somewhere deep in space, the distance between human determination and Cathari pride narrowed with every passing second. War was coming to threshold prime whether anyone was ready for it or not. The TCNS Indomitable entered weapons, ranged like a predator stepping into hunting territory. It owned by right of strength and experience. Captain Helena Voss stood on her bridge with hands clasped behind her back and watched the Cathay fleet's positions on her tactical display with the calm assessment of someone who had fought this exact scenario 100 times in simulations, and twice that many in actual combat across a dozen different star systems. Range to lead Cathay elements, she requested quietly. 30,000 kilometers, and closing her weapons officer Lieutenant Chen responded with professional precision. They're maintaining defensive formation Alpha 7, which suggests they're treating us as a standard threat profile. They'll learn, Voss said simply. Her executive officer, Commander Williams, moved to stand beside her command chair and spoke in a voice pitched low enough that only Voss could hear the question he was asking. Captain, do you think they'll actually back down without engagement? No. Voss answered honestly, because their admiral is proud and experienced, and has 47 ships to our one, which means mathematics tells him he should win easily. And will he? Williams asked. Voss allowed herself the smallest smile that held no humor but considerable confidence. No, she said again, because mathematics doesn't account for human engineering or human tactical doctrine or the fact that every ship in their fleet is designed to fight other ships exactly like themselves. The tactical display showed the Cathay formation beginning to shift as vessels moved to establish overlapping fields of fire that would theoretically allow them to concentrate their plasma weapons on any single target from multiple vectors simultaneously. They're preparing to fire, Chun reported. Let them, Voss ordered, but stand ready on point defense and give me passive lock on their flagship as primary target. The first Cathay volley came exactly as Voss had predicted after reviewing the Empire's military doctrine files that Terran intelligence had compiled from years of observation and analysis. 20 plasma bolts launched from 10 different Cathay destroyers and cruisers streaked across the void toward the Indomitable with enough combined energy to vaporize a small moon given sufficient concentration of fire. Point defense batteries engage. Chan commanded his weapons teams. The Indomitable's defensive systems activated with mechanical precision that represented the latest generation of human military technology, applied to the ancient problem of not dying when people shot at you with very large guns. Railgun turrets tracked the incoming plasma fire with computer-assisted accuracy and fired tungsten slugs at velocities that turned simple metal into armor-piercing projectiles capable of disrupting plasma containment fields through kinetic impact alone. Energy barriers flickered into existence along the ship's hull where projected impact points suggested the point defense might miss targets, and those barriers shimmered like captured starlight bending space itself to deflect rather than absorb incoming fire. Every single plasma bolt died before touching the Indomitable's actual armor plating on the Cathay flagship's bridge. Admiral Scareth stared at his tactical display in shocked disbelief, because no known species possessed point defense systems capable of that level of comprehensive target interception. All ships, he commanded into the fleet communication channel, concentrate fire on the human vessel and overwhelm their defensive systems through sheer volume. 6 Cathay destroyers broke formation and accelerated toward the Indomitable at their maximum engine output with weapons, charging for close-range engagement where even superior point defense might fail against massed fire at reduced distances. Voss watched them come with the patience of a chess master waiting for an opponent to commit to a losing move. Chun, she said calmly, you may engage with main batteries at your discretion. Aye, Captain. Chun responded, and his hands moved across his weapons console with practiced efficiency, firing Mac guns 1 and 2. The magnetic accelerator cannons were humanity's answer to the question of what happens when you take a railgun design and scale it up to warship mounting size while adding enough power generation to accelerate projectiles to a significant percentage of light speed. Two destroyers simply ceased to exist as coherent vessels when the NSC rounds struck them center mass and tore through their hulls like bullets through paper before the kinetic energy transfer explosively disassembled every structural component in expanding spheres of shrapnel and flash-frozen atmosphere. Missiles away, Chun announced as launch tubes along the Indomitable's flanks opened and released a swarm of independently guided warheads. Each missile carried a compact nuclear warhead and an AI guidance system sophisticated enough to adjust its approach vector in real time, based on target movement and predicted defensive responses. 3 more Cathary destroyers tried to evade, but the missiles compensated faster than organic crews could react, and nuclear fire bloomed in the void like artificial stars, being born and dying in the span of heartbeats. The 6th destroyer broke off its attack run and attempted to flee back to the relative safety of the main fleet formation. Laser Battery 3, Chun called out, "Target the fleeing destroyer." Negative. Voss countermanded quietly, "Give me the particle beam." "Aye, Captain." Chun acknowledged, charging particle beam to full power. The particle beam was relatively new technology in the Terran arsenal and represented a weapon system that could only function in the hard vacuum of space where there was no atmosphere to scatter or deflect the stream of accelerated particles. When it fired, the beam was invisible to human eyes, but the effect was immediately obvious as the fleeing destroyer's stern simply melted under the focused stream of subatomic destruction that cored the vessel from engines to bridge in less than 3 seconds. Silence filled the Indomitable's bridge for a long moment as every officer processed what they had just witnessed. 5 Cathari destroyers destroyed in 90 seconds of actual combat. "The flagship is broadcasting," the communications officer, Lieutenant Park, announced. "Let me hear it," Voss ordered. Admiral Scareth's voice came through with a tremor that he couldn't quite control despite his obvious efforts at maintaining military composure. "Human vessel, this is Admiral Scareth commanding the 3rd Fleet," he said. "Your actions constitute an act of war against the Cathari Empire." Voss took a moment before responding because she wanted to choose her words carefully for what came next. "Broadcast on all frequencies," she told Park. "I want every ship in this system to hear this clearly." Park nodded and activated the communication systems. Admiral Scareth, Voss said clearly, "My actions constitute a response to your illegal blockade of a civilian colony and your acts of war against unarmed colonists who have committed no crime except existing in territory you claim without legitimate authority." She paused and let that sink in before continuing. "You were given 1 hour to withdraw peacefully," she continued. "You chose to fire on my vessel instead, which makes everything that follows a direct consequence of your decisions and your choices. You are 1 ship against 42 remaining vessels." Scareth shot back with anger replacing fear in his voice. "You cannot possibly believe you can defeat the entire 3rd Fleet, Admiral." Voss said, and her voice went cold in a way that made even her own crew members feel a chill. "I don't believe anything because I don't need to believe when I have facts and capabilities and a mission to complete." She gestured to Chun, who understood immediately what his captain wanted. "You have 42 ships designed to fight other Cathari vessels." Voss continued while her weapon systems locked onto 6 more targets. "I have 1 ship designed to fight anything and everything while protecting the people who built it. Last chance," she offered. "Withdraw beyond the border zone within the next 10 minutes, or learn exactly why the Terran Confederation doesn't send fleets when 1 ship will suffice." She cut the transmission before Scareth could respond. "All batteries," she commanded her bridge crew. "Prepare for full engagement. but maintain fire discipline and target selection protocols. "Aye, Captain," came the chorus of responses. The Indomitable accelerated toward the Cathay fleet formation, and somewhere in the mathematics of warfare, the equation was being solved, whether Admiral Scarth understood the variables or not. Williams leaned close to Voss again. "Do you think he'll retreat?" he asked. Voss shook her head. "No," she said, "because he still thinks numbers matter more than technology." "And if he's right," Williams pressed. Voss smiled that same humorless smile. "Then we'll make history as the most expensive single ship the Cathari ever destroyed," she said, "but I don't plan on making history that way today." The tactical display showed the Cathari fleet beginning to move into a new formation, and Voss recognized the pattern from the doctrine files. They were preparing for a full fleet engagement. "Here we go," she announced to her crew. "Show them what human engineering really means." The battle that followed would be studied in military academies across a dozen star systems for decades afterward, as a textbook example of how superior technology and tactical flexibility could overcome numerical advantage when applied. With ruthless precision and absolute confidence, Admiral Scarth watched from his flagship as the single human vessel did something no enemy ship had ever done in his 30 years of military service. It attacked, not defensively and not with the desperate fury of the outmatched, but with calculated aggression that suggested the Indomitable had studied Cathari formations and found them wanting. The human ship didn't engage in the traditional broadside exchanges that define naval combat across most of known space, where vessels lined up at comfortable distances and traded fire until one side's shields failed or ammunition ran dry. Instead, the Indomitable moved through three-dimensional space like a fighter craft despite its massive size and used its superior engine output to occupy positions that Scarth's tactical training had never identified as strategically valuable. "They're using our blind spots," his tactical officer reported with confusion, clear in his voice. "Positioning themselves where our weapons have limited firing angles. Adjust formation," Scarth commanded, "and rotate vessels to eliminate those gaps." But every time the Cathari fleet adjusted, the human ship was already moving to a new position that exploited different weaknesses in their defensive arrangement. Chun called out targets from his weapon station with mechanical efficiency. "Mac Gun 1 firing," he announced. A Cathari cruiser took the hit on its port side, and the magnetic accelerator round punched through shields and armor like they were tissue paper before the kinetic energy transfer sent the vessel tumbling end over, and with atmosphere venting from a dozen hull breaches. "Missile spread beta," Chun continued, targeting Cruiser Group 7. The missiles launched in a pattern that looked random until they adjusted course mid-flight and converged on three Cathari cruisers from different vectors simultaneously. Nuclear detonations lit up the void, and when the radiation cleared, two cruisers were disabled and drifting, while the third had lost its entire command section to the blast. "Particle beam charged and ready," Chun reported. "Hold," Voss ordered while studying her tactical display. "Give me the laser batteries instead and target their communication vessels." "Clever," Williams murmured from his position beside the command chair. "Cut off their coordination." The laser batteries fired with invisible precision and Cathari communication. Ships began experiencing catastrophic failures in their BROADCAST equipment as focus coherent. Light burned through their sensor arrays and transmission dishes. Scarth's fleet was slowly being blinded and rendered unable to coordinate effectively. All vessels, Scarth broadcast on the emergency backup channel, converge on the human ship and engage at close range where their superior weapons won't matter. 15 Cathari warships accelerated toward the Indomitable from multiple vectors in a maneuver designed to overwhelm any single target. through sheer mass of fire. Incoming vessels on intercept courses, Williams reported. I see them. Voss acknowledged. Chun, give me kinetic kill vehicles on the closest 6 targets. The kinetic kill vehicles were elegantly simple weapons that represented human engineering at its most brutally efficient. They were tungsten rods with minimal guidance systems accelerated to relativistic speeds by magnetic launchers. No warheads and no complex electronics, and nothing that could be jammed or spoofed. Just mass and velocity combining to deliver energy on target, equivalent to tactical nuclear weapons. 6 Cathay vessels died instantly when the tungsten rods struck them at speeds that turned metal into plasma and turned the ships themselves into expanding clouds of superheated gas. 9 vessels remaining on approach, Williams updated. Deploy countermeasure drones. Voss ordered, and give me emergency acceleration burn on Vector 37 Mark II. The Indomitable released dozens of small drones that immediately began broadcasting false sensor signatures, while the main ship's engines flared with fusion fire and pushed the massive vessel into a new trajectory that the Cathay had no way to predict. The remaining 9 attacking vessels found themselves firing on decoys, while the real target repositioned behind them and engaged with devastating effect. Particle beam, Chun announced, firing. The beam weapon carved through 3 Cathay vessels in a single sustained burst that demonstrated both the weapon's power and Chun's skill at managing the targeting systems. Mac guns 1 through 4. Chun continued sequential fire. 4 more Cathay ships took catastrophic damage from the magnetic accelerator rounds and had to withdraw from combat with critical systems failures. The last 2 attacking vessels attempted to retreat, but Voss was already anticipating that response. Missiles, she ordered simply. The AI-guided warheads pursued the fleeing Cathay ships and adjusted their approach vectors to compensate for every evasive maneuver until nuclear fire claimed both targets. Scareth stared at his tactical display in growing horror as the battle's mathematics became undeniable. 15 ships sent to overwhelm 1 target. 15 ships destroyed or disabled in less than 3 minutes. Status report, he demanded from his bridge crew. 17 vessels combat effective, his tactical officer reported with a tremor in his voice. 12 vessels damaged but operational, and 3 vessels destroyed outright. The Indomitable had reduced his fleet by more than half, and the human ship was showing no signs of significant damage despite having absorbed dozens of plasma hits and energy. Weapon strikes. How is their armor holding? Scareth asked, because he needed to understand what he was facing. Their hull plating appears to be layered ablative armor, his sensors officer reported. Plasma fire burns away outer layers, but the underlying structure remains intact. And their shields, Scareth pressed. They're not using traditional shields, the officer explained. They're using some kind of projected energy barrier that deflects rather than absorbs incoming fire, which means they're not accumulating damage the way our ships do. Scareth closed his eyes and forced himself to think tactically, despite the fear and shock that threatened to cloud his judgment. He was losing badly against a single ship that was fighting like nothing in the Cathay Empire's centuries of military history. All vessels, he broadcast, fall back to defensive formation, Delta, and prepare for fighting retreat. His remaining ships began to regroup, but the Indomitable wasn't giving them time to organize properly. Voss watched the Cathay fleet's attempted reorganization and recognized the pattern from her tactical studies. They're trying to retreat while maintaining defensive coverage, she told Williams. Do we pursue? He asked. Voss considered the question carefully because this was the critical decision point, where tactical victory could become strategic success or failure. Yes, she decided, but we're not here to exterminate them completely. Captain, Williams said carefully, if we let them regroup, they might try again. No. Voss disagreed. They won't, because we're going to give them a very specific lesson about what happens when you threaten human colonies. She turned to Park at Communications. Target the flagship specifically, she ordered. I want Admiral Scareth to understand this personally. The Indomitable altered course and accelerated directly toward the Crimson Talon with single-minded purpose. Scareth saw the human ship coming for him and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service. Pure terror. All vessels protect the flagship, he commanded, but his remaining ships were scattered and damaged and unable to coordinate an effective defense. The Indomitable carved through the Cathari defensive formation like it wasn't even there. Macrams disabled 2 cruisers that tried to intercept. Missiles destroyed a destroyer that positioned itself between the human ship and its target. Laser fire crippled the Crimson Talon's weapon systems and engines in sequential strikes that demonstrated horrifying precision. And then the human ship simply stopped 3,000 kilometers from Scareth's now helpless flagship. We're being hailed, his communications officer reported. Answer it, Scareth commanded, because surrender was better than death. Captain Voss appeared on his display, and her expression held no triumph or satisfaction. Just professional assessment of a mission objective being accomplished. Admiral Scareth, she said calmly, you have 12 operational vessels remaining, and your flagship is disabled. Scareth said nothing because there was nothing to say. You're going to order your fleet to withdraw beyond the border zone. Voss continued, and you're going to report to your superiors exactly what happened here today. And if I refuse, Scareth asked hoarsely. Voss's expression didn't change. Then I'll destroy every remaining ship in your fleet and transmit the battle recordings to your government. Myself, she said, but I prefer you survive to deliver the message personally, because fear is more effective when it comes from someone they trust. She leaned forward slightly. Withdraw, she ordered, or die. Scareth made his choice. Admiral Scareth sat in his command throne aboard the crippled Crimson Talon and felt the weight of defeat pressing down on him like physical force that made even breathing feel difficult. His bridge crew watched him with expressions that mixed fear and shame and desperate hope that their admiral would find some way to salvage dignity from comprehensive military humiliation. Captain Voss waited on his display screen with infinite patience while her ship's weapons remained locked on his vessel and on every other Cathari ship that still possessed the ability to fight or flee. Time is passing, Admiral, Voss said quietly, and my patience is not unlimited. Scareth made the calculation that every defeated commander throughout history had been forced to make when pride confronted survival and when honor met the cold reality of superior force applied without mercy. Stand down all weapon systems, he ordered his crew, and broadcast fleet-wide withdrawal orders on all channels. His officers moved to comply with mechanical efficiency born from training that operated even when hope had fled. All vessels of the Third Fleet. Scareth spoke into the communication system. This is Admiral Scareth with Emergency Command Directive Alpha 00. He paused because the words tasted like ash in his mouth. Withdraw immediately to Rally Point 7 beyond the border zone. He continued, and do not engage the human vessel under any circumstances. The tactical display showed his surviving ships beginning to accelerate away from Threshold Prime and away from the human warship that had destroyed a fleet with ruthless efficiency. 12 ships fleeing, 3 more limping along behind with damaged engines, and his flagship dead in space waiting for either rescue or execution, depending on Captain Voss's mood and mission parameters. I have complied with your demands. Scareth told Voss with what little dignity he could muster. Will you honor your word and allow my vessels to withdraw? I will. Voss confirmed, because I'm not here to exterminate the Cathari fleet. She leaned forward in her command chair, and her expression shifted to something harder and colder. I need you to understand something, Admiral, she said, and I need you to communicate this understanding to your superiors with absolute clarity. Scareth forced himself to meet her eyes on the display. The Indomitable is not our newest ship, Voss continued, and it's not our most powerful ship. She let that statement hang in the air between them, while Scareth felt his blood turn cold. This vessel is 40 years old by Terran standards, Voss explained, and we use it for patrol duty in sectors where we don't expect to encounter serious military opposition. Scareth's mind reeled, because if this ship was old and weak by human standards, then what did their actual warships look like? We sent it here alone because we needed to send a message, Voss said, not wage a war. What message? Scareth asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. That humanity is now watching your empire's expansion, Voss stated flatly, and we've seen what you do to species that resist your authority. She gestured at something off-screen. We've intercepted broadcasts from Threshold Prime. She continued, civilians begging for help, while your fleet slowly starved them into submission. Voss's voice went quiet, but somehow more intense. So here's the message, Admiral, she said. Humanity is now involved in this sector, and we will not tolerate what you've been doing to these colonies. You have 24 hours to withdraw all Cathari military forces beyond the recognized border zone, she stated. And if we have to send our actual war fleet to enforce that withdrawal, we won't be coming to liberate colonies. She paused for effect. We'll be coming to end your empire as a functioning political entity, she finished. And we have the capability to do exactly that if you force our hand. The transmission cut, and Scareth sat alone with his thoughts while his bridge crew processed what they had just heard. If the humans could send one old patrol ship and destroy a fleet, then what could they do with modern warships? What could they do with 100 such vessels? What could they do with 1,000? The mathematics of that question terrified Scareth more than the battle itself had. Captain Voss turned to Commander Williams after ending the transmission. Do you think they'll actually withdraw? Williams asked. Yes, Voss said with certainty. Because Scareth is a professional soldier, and professionals understand when they've been beaten. And if his superiors order him back, Williams pressed, then we destroy him and every ship they send. Voss answered simply, but I don't think it will come to that, because the Cathari are intelligent enough to recognize a threat when it demonstrates itself this clearly. Williams nodded slowly. Permission to speak freely, Captain, he requested. Granted, Voss said. Did we mean what we said about destroying their empire? Williams asked, because that's a hell of a commitment to make without direct authorization from command. Voss allowed herself a small smile. We didn't commit to anything, she pointed out. I simply stated what we have the capability to do, which is factually accurate. Whether we would actually do it depends entirely on whether they force us to prove our capabilities. She continued, and I'm betting they're smart enough to avoid that scenario. On Threshold Prime's surface, the colonists were gathering around every communication screen and display that still functioned after 6 cycles of blockade-imposed hardship. Sarah Chun, who served as the colony's elected leader, stood in the main assembly hall and watched the tactical feed that the Indomitable was broadcasting on open frequencies. She watched the Cathari fleet withdraw. She watched the human warship take up orbit around their world. And she felt tears streaming down her face while the assembled colonists erupted in cheers and shouts and embraces of pure relief. They came, someone said beside her. I didn't think anyone would come, but they actually came. Sarah wiped her eyes and tried to process the emotions flooding through her. Hope and gratitude and disbelief all mixed together. Get me a communication link to that ship, she ordered the technician manning the broadcast equipment. It took several minutes to establish the connection, but eventually Captain Voss appeared on their display looking tired but professional. Captain Voss, Sarah began. I'm Sarah Chun and I lead this colony's civilian government. Ms. Chun, Voss acknowledged. I'm glad to see you survived the blockade. We wouldn't have survived much longer. Sarah admitted. Our food supplies were nearly exhausted. We're already preparing relief supplies for transport to the surface. Voss assured her, and we have medical teams standing by if you have casualties requiring treatment. Sarah felt fresh tears threatening. Why did you come? She asked. We're just one colony and you risked so much. Voss's expression softened slightly. You're human beings in danger, she said simply. And that's all the reason we need. How long can you stay? Sarah asked because she feared the answer. As long as necessary to ensure your security. Voss promised. We're not abandoning you to the Catheri's mercy. Thank you, Sarah said and meant it with every fiber of her being. The transmission ended, and Sarah turned to face the assembled colonists. We're safe, she announced, and we're not alone anymore. The cheering that followed could probably be heard on the Indomitable without communication equipment. Across Cathari space in the Empire's capital city, emergency council sessions were being convened with unprecedented urgency. Ministers and military leaders gathered in the high chamber to review battle recordings that Admiral Scareth had transmitted before beginning his withdrawal. They watched the human ship destroy Cathari vessels with contemptuous ease. They watched their fleet's formations shattered by weapons and tactics they had never encountered. They watched one ship do what should have been impossible. The Supreme Chancellor of the Cathari Empire was an ancient being whose scales had faded to silver with age and whose eyes had witnessed 3 centuries of military expansion and political consolidation. She watched the recordings 3 times before speaking. Analysis, she commanded her assembled advisors. The Minister of Military Affairs stood with obvious reluctance. The human vessel never operated at full combat capacity, he reported. Our intelligence analysts estimate it was functioning at approximately 60 to 70% of maximum output. Based on power signature readings, the chamber went silent. Continue, the Chancellor ordered. Several weapon systems were never deployed. The minister explained, and they never launched their ground assault forces, despite having significant marine detachments aboard, according to vessel classification standards. What does this suggest? The Chancellor asked, though she clearly already knew. That they were testing us, the minister admitted, gathering intelligence on our capabilities, while demonstrating their own superiority. The Chancellor's tail twitched in a gesture that signified deep contemplation. Recommendations, she requested. The Minister of Foreign Affairs stood carefully. We should request diplomatic negotiations, she suggested, and propose a formal border agreement that respects human territorial claims. That would be interpreted as weakness, the War Minister objected. It would be interpreted as wisdom, the Foreign Minister countered, because the alternative is war with a species that just demonstrated technological superiority we cannot currently match. The Chancellor raised her hand for silence. We will pursue diplomatic contact, she decided, and we will respect the border zone they have established. 3 months passed since the battle that the galaxy's intelligence, NETWORKS, had already designated as the Threshold Prime Incident, and Captain Helena Voss stood on her bridge watching. Relief supplies being transported down to the colonies. Surface with mechanical efficiency. The Indomitable had become a permanent fixture in orbit around the world it had liberated, and the colonists below had transformed from desperate survivors into thriving settlers who no longer feared starvation or military conquest. Final supply transport departing now, Lieutenant Park reported from communications. Acknowledged, Voss responded while reviewing status reports on her tactical display. Commander Williams approached her command chair with a datapad containing the latest intelligence summaries from Terran, Confederation Naval Command. The Cathari formally requested diplomatic negotiations 2 weeks after we arrived here, he reported, and they've withdrawn all military vessels beyond the border zone we established. Good, Voss said simply. More interesting is what our intelligence assets are reporting about internal Cathary communications, Williams continued. Tell me, Voss requested. Their military academies are completely restructuring their tactical doctrine. Williams explained, and they're pouring resources into researching the weapons technologies we demonstrated during the battle. Expected. Voss noted, any species that survives by conquest learns to adapt or dies. They're also apparently terrified of us. Williams added with a slight smile. Voss frowned. Fear breeds resentment, she observed, and resentment breeds future conflict. You'd prefer they respected us, Williams guessed. I'd prefer they understood us, Voss corrected. Fear is useful for establishing boundaries, but understanding is necessary for lasting peace. She gestured at the planet below. We came here because civilians needed help, she said, not because we wanted to demonstrate military superiority. The demonstration was necessary, though, Williams pointed out. Yes, Voss agreed, but only because the Cathary didn't understand that humanity protects its own. Park interrupted their conversation. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the colony's central government building. Put it through, Voss ordered. Sarah Chung appeared on the display, looking healthier than she had 3 months earlier when the blockade had nearly starved the colony into submission. Captain Voss, Sarah greeted her warmly. I wanted to inform you personally that the Terran Confederation has approved our request for permanent settlement status. Congratulations, Voss said sincerely. You've earned it after surviving what you went through. We couldn't have survived without you. Sarah acknowledged, which brings me to the actual reason for my call. Go ahead, Voss encouraged. The Colony Council has voted unanimously to erect a monument commemorating your arrival and the liberation of Threshold Prime, Sarah explained. Voss felt uncomfortable with the idea of monuments to her actions. That's not necessary, she began, but Sarah interrupted gently. It's not about you specifically, Captain. Sarah said, it's about what you and your crew represent. Which is what? Voss asked. Hope, Sarah answered simply, and the knowledge that humanity doesn't abandon its people when they need help most. Voss considered that perspective. What does this monument say? She finally asked. Sarah smiled. Here humanity answered the call. She quoted, 1 ship and 1 crew and 1 chance at freedom. Voss felt something tighten in her chest, because those words captured the mission's essence better than any tactical report. I'm honored, she said quietly, and I know my crew will be as well. There's something else. Sarah added, the Terran Confederation Navy has assigned a permanent patrol squadron to this sector, which means you'll be departing soon. Yes. Voss confirmed, we have new orders taking us to the Arcturus colonies. Another distress call. Sarah guessed. Something like that, Voss acknowledged. Sarah's expression grew serious. Then I'll say goodbye now, Captain, she said. And thank you for everything you've done for us. Just doing our job. Voss deflected, but Sarah shook her head. No, she disagreed. You went far beyond duty when you challenged an entire fleet alone. Someone had to, Voss said. The transmission ended, and Williams moved beside the command chair again. She's right, you know, he observed. We did go beyond standard operational parameters. The situation required it, Voss stated. And if the Cathary had possessed weapons capable of destroying us. Williams pressed, what then? Voss turned to face her executive officer directly. Then we would have bought time for the colonists to evacuate and for the Confederation to send reinforcements, she said. And we would have made the Cathary pay dearly for every meter of space they claimed. That's not very reassuring, Williams noted. It's honest, Voss countered. And honesty is what I owe my crew when I ask them to risk their lives. Park interrupted again. Captain, we're receiving new orders from Fleet Command. Display them, Voss ordered. The orders scrolled across her tactical screen, and Voss read them with professional detachment. The Indomitable was being reassigned to the Arcturus sector, where colony vessels had reported unusual activity from an unknown species that might or might not represent a potential threat. "Wow," Williams said after reading the orders himself. "Looks like we're not getting shore leave anytime soon." "Plot a course for Arcturus," Voss commanded her navigation officer, "and prepared the ship for departure within 6 hours." "Aye, Captain," came the response. Across the Cathari Empire in the High Chamber of Governance, the diplomatic negotiations with humanity have produced a formal treaty that established clear borders and mutual non-aggression agreements. The Supreme Chancellor reviewed the treaty documents with satisfaction because war with the humans would have been catastrophic for the Empire regardless of whether they eventually won or lost. "The humans have agreed to respect our territorial claims in the Outer Rim," Foreign Minister reported, "in exchange for our complete withdrawal from the border zones and recognition of human colonial authority." "Acceptable," the Chancellor stated, "though it stings to surrender territory we claimed through conquest. Better to surrender empty territory than lose populated worlds," the War Minister observed with uncharacteristic wisdom. "Indeed," the Chancellor agreed. She stood and addressed her assembled council. "Let this be a lesson in pragmatism," she said. "The Cathari Empire has survived by knowing when to expand and when to consolidate. This is a time for consolidation," she continued, "and for studying these humans who appear from nowhere with capabilities we didn't anticipate." "What if they prove expansionist themselves?" someone asked. "Then we will deal with that threat when it manifests," the Chancellor answered. "But the intelligence we've gathered suggests humans are reactive rather than aggressive. They respond to threats against their people," she explained, "but they don't seem interested in conquest for its own sake." "That makes them unusual," the War Minister noted. "That makes them manageable," the Chancellor corrected, "because we can coexist with species that simply want to protect their territory." "Issue orders fleet-wide," she commanded. "The border zones are to be respected absolutely, and any vessel that violates human space will be court-martialed, regardless of rank or reason." "We cannot afford another threshold prime," she stated flatly. The council members acknowledged the order with solemn agreement because none of them wanted to face human warships again. Aboard the Indomitable, the crew prepared for departure with the practiced efficiency of personnel who had performed these procedures countless times. Captain Voss walked through her ship's corridors and observed her crew at work. Engineers checking power systems, weapons officers running diagnostic protocols, medical staff organizing supplies, every person aboard performing their duties with professionalism and dedication. She reached the observation deck where several off-duty crew members had gathered to watch Threshold Prime one last time before departure. "Captain," one of them acknowledged her presence. "As you were," Voss said and moved to stand beside them. They watched the planet in silence for several minutes. "Do you think we made a difference?" one of the younger crew members asked. "Yes," Voss answered without hesitation. "We saved lives and established human authority in a sector that needed it. But we also made enemies," another pointed out. "We made the Cathari respect us," Voss corrected, "which is different from making enemies." "Fear isn't respect," the first crew member observed. "No," Voss agreed, "but it's a starting point for negotiation." She turned to face her crew. "We didn't come here to conquer or to demonstrate superiority." She reminded them, "We came because people needed help. Everything else," she continued, "every shot fired and every ship destroyed was in service to that single mission." "Will there be more missions like this?" someone asked. Voss smiled slightly. "Probably," she admitted, "because the galaxy is large and humanity is expanding and conflicts are inevitable when different species compete for resources and territory. But remember," she added, "we don't fight for glory or conquest. We fight to protect," she stated, "and that makes all the difference." The ship's communication system chimed. "Captain to the bridge," Williams's voice announced. "We're ready for departure." Voss took one last look at Threshold Prime. "Let's go," she told her crew. "Other people are waiting for you."